I will have to say I'm a bit skeptical of this argument that odd-year voters are magically more intelligent, more informed voters than even-year voters.
We've got more time on our hands, Josh. We've just got more time on our hands.
But even setting that aside, money in elections is going to be a problem regardless of what year we hold our elections.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
We're back on the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. I'm joined by Josh Martin. A jam-packed episode for you. We're going to be talking about a series of charter commission developments, even-year elections. We have a police oversight commission attempt at a charter amendment that is falling short because more than half the signatures on the petition were invalid. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the Board of Estimate and Taxation, what's going on there. We're going to talk about that at the very end because I know none of you are going to stick around long enough to hear that. We're going to start off with sexier issues. First, the Ilhan Omar, Representative Ilhan Omar, is DFL endorsed at a convention over the weekend. And the 2040, we have developments in the 2040 plan saga, which is in its sixth year, just about to be seventh year of litigation from pretend environmentalists. So, Josh, you and I were both at the CD5 convention where Ilhan was endorsed, DFL endorsed. The thing that struck me, and tell me how you feel, is that I was so underwhelmed. I come in with low expectations for Don Samuels, and even with that low bar I have for him, so underwhelming. I don't know why he's running aside from Ilhan resentment. There was a Reformer interview where he just repeatedly complained about the broken down car in his neighbor's yard. He seems to be fixated on local issues like policing, MPD. He's very upset about the defund the police movement in a way that makes me think he should be running for mayor. Like he's running a mayoral campaign for U.S. Congress.
Yeah, I think that's right. He's certainly talking a lot of issues you normally hear more in a local campaign. There's the part about the article where they described him as the old man who tells you to get off his lawn. And when he is asked about issues that federal issues ordinarily deal with, he doesn't seem to necessarily have good answers or any answers. His answer on how he was going to address climate change was particularly disappointing and lacking of any substance. You know, he drives an electric car, so that's how he's going to fix climate change.
Yeah, it was like, how are you going to make sure we have a livable planet for future generations? It's like, I've been driving electric and hybrid cars since they came out. What do you want me to say? He bases a lot of his arguments on character. Like, I am a really good person, me, Don Samuels, so in addition to the climate change answer, which was a non-answer, right? You're not responding to it at all. There's no policy content there at all. It's like, I mean, if we expect ExxonMobil to make these changes, we have to start with ourselves, don't we? And his equal rights answer was similarly like personality based. Right. Like decades ago in my workplace, guess who was an ally to the women in that workplace who were mistreated? Don Samuels, this guy right here. And so very like, I'm a good guy, vote for me, I'm a good guy. And not attempting to, this is the second time he's running for Congress. He should be better at this. He is clearly worse in my eyes. He should have answers to climate change questions.
Yeah,
that's a big one.
He should have a policy platform. We don't, voters don't want to just hear about his personal qualities. I would presume they want to hear about what he's going to do if he's elected as a member of Congress. And these are some of the key issues that he'll face if he were to be elected and serve in Congress. The fact that you brought up the ERA thing also reminds me of how he said he would work with Republicans to get the ERA passed, which was...
yeah, that's another thing that gets on my nerves. The degree to which he's like, me, Don Samuels, I am the one to bring Republicans along. I will treat them so nice. They will be convinced of the rightness of our cause. Just, Martin Luther King, and I'm paraphrasing Don Samuels here, he didn't call them redneck crackers. That's not how Martin Luther King addressed conservatives during the civil rights movement. He called them my misled white brothers. And I don't think that's going to work on your MAGA colleagues in Congress, Don. The problem we have these days is not that Ilhan Omar casts too many stones at the Republican Party of 2024. She's not inciting them to misbehavior. They're doing it on their own. I don't think Don Samuels is the one to convince them, as much as they may like him, as much as Clarence Thomas's patron Harlan Crow likes Don Samuels. I don't know if that's going to translate to policy. Your Republican friends, Don, they are motivated by Ilhan resentment. That's where that's coming from. It's not your personal qualities. They don't think you're a good guy.
I think I would just point out that Ilhan Omar won the endorsement on the first ballot, which is very exciting. It's the first time that she's won the endorsement she's always won the endorsement. It's the first time she's won the endorsement on the first ballot. So I think that bodes well for her campaign going into the primary.
You know how I knew Ilhan was likely to be endorsed? I was following the Josh Martin Google Docs delegate spreadsheet. Is there anything to glean from how that played out? I feel like the impression I got was she started kind of slow. It wasn't looking great in the beginning, the first couple of Senate district conventions. But as it went along, they got better at picking up delegates. Am I characterizing that correctly?
I would agree with that assessment. Certainly things looked a little more troubling in the earlier conventions. And then there was like a weekend where like all the conventions happened at once, it seemed. And there was a much stronger performance by the Ilhan Omar campaign in picking up delegates in those conventions. And I think in addition to that, there was, the turnout game in between that and the convention itself.
Are you ready to talk about the 2040 plan? So
Sure.
There was a court ruling from the appeals court slapping down the district court, which had, you remember the news a couple of months ago when it was like, well, the city has to revert to their 2030 plan. That's what the district court judge said. That was his chosen remedy. In order to address the environmental concerns, revert to the 2030 plan, conduct the environmental assessment, and who knows how long it would be. The appeals court has reversed that, said it was unnecessary. So there were other remedies possible. They said there's no factual record to support the district court judge's determination the 2040 plan is more harmful than the 2030 plan. So one of the city's arguments is, you're making us revert to the old plan, and we calculate if we fully built out our previous plan, that would be 700,000 units. And you've said the 2040 plan is a disaster because it would result in 150,000 new units in these low-density areas. Like, under what criteria have you decided the 2030 plan is worse? And the appeals court slapped down the district court judge and was like, just because one of the things the district court judge said was, well, there have been no challenges to the 2030 plan, must be good, must be no problems with it. Why wouldn't we revert? And the appeals court was like, just because there's an absence of legal action against the previous plan doesn't mean it was better.
Yep.
And from my perspective, it just means you antagonize the wrong deep pockets in Minneapolis with your 2040 plan. Has nothing to do with environmental concerns, as we've been saying this whole time.
The appeals court ruling, I think, was certainly good to see. It's good to see that for now we can build under the 2040 plan again. But just like any other development in this litigation, it is just one more step in the process. This litigation will continue either forever or until there's a legislative fix, whichever of those comes first.
And we're going to talk about the legislative fix.
And Smart
next.
Growth Minneapolis has already said they intend to appeal the appeals court ruling to the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Just bottomless bank accounts over there at Smart Growth Minneapolis. Bottomless bank accounts. Yeah, I mean they will appeal it. It's gonna continue to bounce around between these courts. And the hilarious thing to me is, I said earlier, like at the end of this year, we will be entering the 7th year of legal wrangling over a 10-year plan. Yep. And pretty soon, the city is going to be doing engagements on our next comp
on the
plan.
2050 plan, yeah.
Remember, the 2040 plan was I can remember I was so young. I had dark hair. And we're about to be talking about the 2050 plan. It's coming. Yeah. But
which means it's almost time for the 2050 plan litigation to start.
Yes. The way it works, Josh, is we do 2050 plan engagement, then we adopt the 2050 plan, then we immediately start on the 2050 plan litigation. That is the comp plan process here in Minneapolis. Unless the legislature steps in, which it appears they might be doing. Josh, I hope you're a Capitol watcher, a state Capitol watcher, because I have no idea what it means that this has been included in it was like transportation and housing omnibus. I assume that's where they just cram in a bunch of random odds and ends that they're going to pass. Like, is this certainly going to pass now that it's in the Senate's omnibus, transportation and housing omnibus thing?
So it's not by any means certain. So an omnibus, and I'm not an expert on the procedures at the Minnesota State Legislature, but so an omnibus bill, like you said, is, they don't do things like we do at the city level, where we tend to have like an ordinance for one thing. They do a lot of legislation, and so in order to manage their work, they package together a whole bunch of things that relate to some general subject matter, and that's an omnibus bill, and then that'll get passed by the House or the Senate. And then after both houses pass their versions, there's a conference committee where they try to work out the differences. And then finally, there's final passage by the House and the Senate of the same thing, which goes to the governor for signature. So
the House has already passed it, and the Senate is including it in their omnibus, which they will hopefully vote on.
So I looked at that recently. It looks like that hasn't made its way out of committee or to the Senate floor yet, but it is included in the omnibus as of now. But like I said, I'm not an expert and haven't been following this closely, so maybe things have changed. But yeah, it still needs to make it through the Senate, and everything's kind of a mess in the Senate right now. Then after it makes it through the Senate, it would go to conference committee, where there is a legislative fix in the House's omnibus as well, but the language is slightly different, so they would need to iron that out. And then finally would need to pass the House and Senate. And there's a fairly tight window of time in which to do all of that, because the legislature needs to adjourn in about a week.
You know what I'm predicting, Josh? I'm not a Capitol watcher. I have no idea what's going on at the state Capitol, but I'm predicting if no more Democrats have their stepmom trip over them at getting out of bed, we will be able to celebrate. The 2040 plan is forever, now and forever, until we start talking about the 2050 plan. That's what I predict. And I think I'm gonna throw it over to you, Josh, for the long, boring explanation of what exactly the even year elections proposal is. Currently, we have odd year elections, and there's a charter commission proposal to take us to even year elections, which potentially could be on your ballot this year in Minneapolis in 2024.
Right. So this is a proposal that's been spearheaded by Barry Clegg, the former chair of the Charter Commission, who's still a member. He pushed this several years ago, but at the time, the city's election staff raised a lot of concerns that this would be very difficult or even impossible to implement due to some technical challenges and some issues in state law. There's been a lot of development since then, both in technologically wise and also in the legal arena. The legislature is probably very soon about to pass the elections omnibus bill. My understanding is the conference committee just came to a report on that. So probably in the near future that will be adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor and become law. Among other things, and there's a lot of good stuff in there that's not related to any of this, there are some provisions, there's a provision in there known as the local options bill, which expands ranked choice voting options for statutory cities. And so now there's actual provisions in state law about ranked choice voting and how that works. And as a part of that, there's some more flexibility around how you design the ballot. So all of this kind of removes some of those concerns there were before. So this is possible now if the Charter Commission wanted to do it. And so because of that, the Charter Commission has been exploring it again. They've had a work group working on it for months, and they eventually reached the conclusion that they would like to proceed with public hearings, which is a normal part in their process. And so that's the next step here. There will be a public hearing. People can speak at the public hearing and can also submit written comments. The Charter Commission will consider that feedback, and then ultimately they will decide the specific language of the Charter Amendment, the kind of mechanism of transition, and then they will determine whether to put it on the ballot. If they decide to put it on the ballot, it goes on the ballot. There's nothing the council can do to stop that, although the council does adopt the language of that actually appears on the ballot for the ballot question, although they tend to follow the guidance of the city attorney in that. So that's where we're at now, is the public hearing, and then the Charter Commission will make a decision.
So when is the public hearing?
Oh, yes, that's a good point. The public hearing is Wednesday, May 22nd, so at 6:30 p.m. At the Public Service Center, which is like a temporary city hall, essentially, as City Hall is under construction.
Okay, so this episode's probably going to come out the 15th on a Wednesday. It's going to be the following Wednesday, the 22nd of May. If you have strong feelings one way or the other, I don't know where I come down on this. It's a big deal. It's going to have a big effect on how the city runs their elections. So if you have thoughts, please go to the public hearing. It's more impactful to go to the public hearing than to send an email that possibly no one will read. Why even year elections, Josh? You said Barry Clegg has particular opinions here. Do you have insight into Barry Clegg's mind?
I don't know that I have insight into his mind, but I can certainly recall what he said during various public meetings. I would say Barry Clegg and Matt Perry are both very strong proponents of this. A lot of the other Charter Commission members are either skeptical or like ambivalent. They can see both the pros and cons of it. The main arguments the biggest argument in favor of it has been higher turnout. More people vote in even year elections. Now, it is also true that as you go further down the ballot, fewer people vote, right? In a presidential election, for example, the most people vote for president. By the time you get to the end of the ballot, much fewer people vote. So it's not going to, suddenly raise turnout to 80% or 60% or whatever it might be. But the theory is that because with maybe the exception of 2021, because the turnout in an even year election is not just a little bit higher, but is like dramatically higher than it is in odd year elections. Even after accounting for that roll off, the theory is that there will still be more people voting for the municipal elections than there are currently in an odd year. So I think that is the certainly the primary argument. They've also talked about how it saves money, although those seems somewhat of an ancillary concern. I believe the estimate was something around $2.5 million over the course of each 4-year cycle, which works out to about $600,000 and change a year, which is not nothing, but it's not a huge amount of money in the context of the city budget.
And Matt Perry is the guy who he runs the internet forum eDemocracy, which is what I like to I consider like where Carol Becker got her start as an online troll. eDemocracy. I think he still runs that. I don't know. I don't remember the last time I was on eDemocracy. I just remember him shutting me down one time for a post that I had written there. I was very resentful for that. Damn you, Matt Perry. Anyway, he also, in addition to being on the Charter Commission, and I think he's on Zoning Board of Adjustment, he has a finger in every little board, commission, internet forum you can think of. He also ran the precursor to all of Minneapolis. There's a PAC in 2017 that spent like $270,000, which was a lot at the time. It's not the millions we see now, but $270,000 in 2017, trying to defeat progressive council candidates. That didn't work in 2017. That was a progressive wave year in the city. And so he is like deeply political, and I like he is for this for very cynical reasons, I guarantee you. He thinks this will dilute the power of activists and unions, probably. Again, this is all speculation on my part. Matt Perry, come on the podcast and speak for yourself if you want. And what else am I speculating this about? Oh, I think maybe denying volunteers to progressive campaigns, potentially. Because if campaigns are all happening, governor, presidential, state legislature, all happening at the same time, it really dilutes your volunteer base. People who may volunteer every year as these campaigns roll through, that will be harder to do. But I think it's hard to argue with the higher turnout thing. Why would anyone be against higher turnout? But the idea is like the local issues and candidates won't get as much attention. They're going to get lost. Like, what good does it do to have somebody show up and vote for city council if they're just like picking the name that they like the best? Well, I like the name Joan. I'm voting for Joan. I've never seen these names before. They vote in that race, but like, is that a meaningful vote if you have no idea about the two candidates running for city council?
Yeah, you've certainly raised a lot of the concerns that are being raised as reasons why not to move elections from odd-numbered years to even-numbered years. Commissioner Doherty, in particular, I think has probably been the most skeptical of this proposal, has raised a number of those concerns. The theory being that voters in the people who currently vote in odd-year elections do so because they are more interested in and perhaps more informed of local issues. People who do not vote in odd-year elections and only vote in even-year elections may be less informed of those issues. There's also certainly I think a very real concern that there will be competition for resources with state and national campaigns. It'll be difficult for local candidates to fundraise, to find volunteers.
I think it could potentially maximize the power of money, because if it becomes a thing where name recognition in the ballot booth is what people are voting on, like which name have I heard of? Like which candidate sent me a mailer? Like I don't know anything about this, but I did get a mailer from that one guy. Are like low information municipal voters going to be swayed because they got a bunch of mailers from one person and they didn't get many from the other, in a way that like highly motivated odd year city voters just aren't as swayed by the money?
I will have to say I'm a bit skeptical of this argument that odd year voters are magically more intelligent, more informed voters than even year voters.
We've got more time on our hands, Josh. We've just got more time on our hands.
But even setting that aside, money in elections is going to be a problem regardless of what year we hold our elections. There certainly will be some concerns related to competition if we hold them in even-numbered years. But the other thing I would say, going back to the turnout, is that it's not just more turnout. It may actually change the makeup of the electorate, because there's more room to grow among lower turnout groups, right? So like just mathematically, right, if you have one group that's already at like 50% turnout in odd year elections and you have one group that's at like 30% turnout in odd year elections, just for some examples, the lower group has a lot more room to grow in even year elections.
This is an equity argument, right?
Right. And I've done some analysis of this, and if you take a look at, for example, like Ward 13 versus Ward 5, it is still true, regardless of what year you look at, that Ward 13 is higher turnout than Ward 5, and therefore is a disproportionate share of citywide elections, such as the mayor. But the ratio is smaller in an even year election than it is in an odd year election, because Ward 5 has more room to grow than Ward 13 does. You eventually reach a point where you kind of cap out at turnout.
This you have articulated very well why I think anyone who is motivated by cynical reasons to push this and thinks, well, this is a way to stick it to the progressives, might regret what they have wished for, because this could end up doing something like giving us a progressive mayor. Like first they went and they changed our government structure to strong mayor because they thought, well, the progressives will never control the mayor's office. Sure, they have the city council, but we'll keep them out of the mayor's office. That's where we'll put all the power. And now you're going to go to even year elections. You could make it easier for a progressive mayor to get elected by increasing turnout among groups that only turn out in those even year elections to vote for Ilhan Omar, to vote for some of the higher profile offices. Imagine Elliot Payne runs for mayor. I don't think he's going to run for mayor, but imagine it. And he gets a boost from voters in North Minneapolis who are more likely to vote in an even year. And he's our mayor. Something like that could very easily happen.
Yeah, and it's not just geographical. There's also demographic differences. There's a lot of reasons for this, but there's a lot of evidence that non-white voters are less likely to turn out in general, and also in lower turnout elections. Voters with less wealth and income are less likely to turn out in lower turnout elections. And younger voters are less likely to turn out in low turnout elections, and all of those groups are, more likely to turn out in even year elections, whereas older, wealthier white voters are fairly likely to turn out regardless of what year it is.
So, Josh, you're talking me into this. Does that mean you are in support of even year elections personally?
I am in support of even year elections personally, and I will be submitting some written comments to the Charter Commission soon. I would say generally, as I've already talked about, I think there is some big arguments for turnout, not only overall, but also in terms of the makeup of the electorate being more representative of the total population. And I'm not sure I buy some of the arguments, like more informed voters. The one thing that I do think is a very real concern is the impacts on campaigns. However, I think that is something that campaigns will be able to creatively address and find ways to work around and work within the new structure. And I think that concern is outweighed by the many positives with this proposal.
I mean, I could see a state Senate candidate, state House candidates, and city council candidates like pooling their resources, and they all go door knocking together.
Yeah, you could have more coordination and collaboration between candidates at different levels of government, which could help them address those funding concerns because all of them have limited resources. And that might also be good for governance to have relationships and collaboration between people at the state legislature and in local government.
We would have to have ward conventions, Senate district conventions, the CD5 convention, all in the same year. Is that like logistically possible to squeeze in another convention?
So there are people with more expertise in this than me. You know some of those people and could talk to them about it more. But in my experience,
I just want to talk to you, Josh. I don't want to talk to those other people.
Well, based on, I think it would be possible. I think it would be logistically possible. It would be challenging, but I think it could be done. And one of the big reasons why, now, first of all, we already have a city convention in even numbered years, right? We have city convention for school board. So that's not new. It's just going to be a longer convention. We would have to add the 13 ward conventions to even numbered years. That's true. But the timing could potentially be more, might have to work out some things with the state party, but the timing could potentially be more flexible on ward and city conventions than it could be for other elections because there's no primary because of ranked choice voting. So the filing period isn't until much later. Therefore, we could potentially have ward and city conventions slightly later in the cycle, and therefore they wouldn't necessarily conflict with all of the other conventions that are going on earlier. The other thing that would be advantageous to the parties is right now the parties need to hold precinct caucuses not only in even-numbered years, and those are the caucuses where you elect the delegates who go to the conventions, right? They need to hold those in even-numbered years. They also need to hold those in the odd years when we have municipal elections. And the city parties need to do that on their own with no support from the state party. If they were able to move elections to even-numbered years, the city party would not need to do that. They could just piggyback off of the precinct caucuses in even-numbered years that already exist. So that would eliminate 135 precinct caucuses in Minneapolis in odd-numbered years that the party would no longer need to organize. So there are some advantages. There are some challenges for the parties, but I think there are also potentially some advantages.
So look forward to many, many conventions pushed out into the parking lot in even numbered years in your future.
Yeah, that's probably a whole other podcast, but yeah.
What do you have to say about parking lot conventions? Josh has been at a series of conventions that have their rental of the building has expired and they were pushed out from the school auditorium to the parking lot. What do you have to say about that?
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one of them is that you could, for instance, have the building rentals for longer period of time, or at the very least inform delegates at the outset of the convention when the room reservation expires, instead of informing delegates that the room reservation expires in 5 minutes.
I've been at plenty of conventions where they inform at the very beginning, hey, this expires at 8:00. And I never believe them. I feel like they're just trying to motivate me to get my business done early. I never believe what they're saying when they're like, the room expires. I feel like we could stay overnight if we wanted to, but apparently it's a real thing.
Yeah, I think there are other challenges to deal with that too. Certainly, there's a lot. I don't think we have time to get into all of this right now, but there's a lot of talk going on within the party about potential rule changes for how conventions are operated that could potentially condense the time that some of the business takes at conventions, rearranging some of the business. And that might also cut down on, conventions that go for 12 hours, whether they go into a parking lot or not. So those are things that the party is certainly talking about, because they realize it's not a good look to have that happen, and they are trying to find ways to address it.
I don't believe they're actually going to find ways to address this, because there's always one side. I said this in the recent, and I'm sorry for so many podcasts focused on political conventions and DFL party stuff, but there's always one side who is motivated to drag this shit out, and it's the side that knows they can't win. And we don't want a result here. We want to drag it out, make people so miserable they're like, let's go home. We came here today hoping to endorse someone, but let's go home and say we can't do it. So I am just endlessly skeptical that there's ever going to be a solution to how long it takes to get through stuff. I was amazed at your tweets from the parking lot at that convention, how quickly the balloting was happening. If you just have people go over and stand next to the candidate they prefer, just let's count bodies here. Let's not count ballots. Go walk over to where you need to be. Let's count it up. It's kind of like a walking sub-caucus, and we can settle it that way. Why don't we do that, Josh?
Well, I think there are some value in a secret ballot and letting people...
But we have to sign our ballot, Josh. Everyone knows you have to sign the back of your ballot.
You do have to sign your ballot, but the tellers do not have the time or interest to actually look at everybody's signatures. They just check that there is a signature.
You could put an X. They check that there's a mark. You don't have to write illegibly. Okay, let's be done with this, Josh. No one cares about our DFL convention talk here.
Hang on. Did we want to talk about presidential versus gubernatorial years and the transition?
Which could potentially have there's a big difference in turnout between those 2 years, but it also means adding more noise to the conversation. You have it in a presidential year. Who has time to pay attention to city council? We will be discussing the potential end of the country. That's what we do in presidential years, to discuss whether we will still have a country after the election, and who cares if we still have a city if we don't have a country. So talk to us about that, Josh.
Yeah, I think if you go with a presidential year, you intensify both the benefits and the negatives of moving to even year elections. On the one hand, you have even higher turnout. So that's great. Even more people will be voting and participating in the elections. On the other hand, you are really exacerbating that problem of competition for resources. Competing with a state legislative campaign or a gubernatorial campaign for resources is one thing. If there's a presidential campaign going on, it's going to be really tough for local campaigns to find volunteers and to raise money. And to just get the attention of voters when there's constantly, TV ads on about who you should vote for president. But again, higher turnout. So I don't know that I have a strong opinion one way or the other on presidential versus gubernatorial.
Who I think has a strong opinion on presidential versus gubernatorial is Matt Perry.
He certainly does. He has expressed that opinion several times.
Which one does he prefer?
He strongly prefers presidential.
Yeah, he wants city stuff to get buried. He wants it so bad, and I don't even know if he's, I don't know if he's correct from his own perspective and his own priorities on that.
And then an interesting thing, so with presidential, I think the transition is pretty clear. The most logical way to do it, and probably what would happen, would be if you switch to presidential, the 2025 election would still happen as scheduled. That would be a 3-year term instead of a 4-year term, and then you would start even year elections in 2028. Now, if you switch to gubernatorial, there's kind of an interesting question of whether you start the first even year election for municipal in 2026 or 2030. And there's some pros and cons to both. If you start in 2026, how you would do that would be you would extend the terms of the existing elected officers in Minneapolis by a
So
year.
we make them dictators. We make them all dictators for life. They didn't run for
well,
an extra
not
year.
not for life, for 1 extra year, but
No, this is so anti-democratic, Josh. I can read the complaints already in the Star Tribune comment section. These little dictators on the city council extending their term by a year, but it wouldn't be their choice. It would be the Charter Commission doing this and voters.
Well, it would ultimately be voters, and you would do that. You would cancel the 2025 election, extend the terms by a year, and start in 2026. The other way of doing it, which would take slightly longer for a transition, but would avoid some of those problems, would be that you would still hold the 2025 election as scheduled. You would have that be a 5-year term instead of a 4-year term, and you would start in 2030. I think if you go with gubernatorial starting in 2030 is the way to go, because if you extend the terms of current elected officials, I think that muddies the waters, and people are not just going to be thinking about the merits of even year elections. They're going to be thinking of, do I want Mayor Jacob Fry or my council member or this council majority in office for another year? And I think that could really jeopardize the passage of this. Yes, it would delay things to get it started if we pushed it out to 2030, but if we try this and it fails, that's going to delay it by even more.
I really wish they had pushed the strong mayor thing to 2025, because I have not enjoyed the figuring it out on the fly experience that we've had since 2021. So let's not make it take effect immediately. Let's give people some time, take a breath. Are we ready for the CPAC conversation?
Now I think we're ready for CPAC.
Okay. Am I correct that so I'm going to try to describe it, charter amendment petition that would have created a Civilian Police Accountability Commission, CPAC, with sweeping powers to investigate misconduct, discipline officers? Am I right that it would give this commission the power to discipline officers? Is that one of the things?
That's what the summary says, yep. Authority to conduct investigations of police misconduct allegations and to discipline officers.
Hire and fire the chief and other employees who are subject to civil service rules. And so the big problem, before we get to the fact that the petition had not enough signatures, not enough valid signatures or matching signatures, is that state law precludes any kind of police oversight commission. So it says the police chief in a given locale has to be the one to discipline officers. So it's just not legally sound, and would, even if the petition had had enough valid signatures, the city attorney would have said this doesn't work, and it would not have been on the ballot anyway. Am I correct there?
I'm not an attorney and I can't provide legal advice, but certainly others have raised those concerns as well, and I think that's highly likely. I think it is likely that the city attorney would find that it conflicts with state law one way or another. If this did get the required number of signatures, it would end up in the courts. Either the city attorney would say it conflicts with state law, and then the people pushing for the petition would sue, and it would end up in the courts. Or the city attorney would say it's fine, and then, Don Samuels or somebody would sue, and it would end up in the courts.
Come on, let's give Don Samuels something to do besides his mayoral campaign to represent Minneapolis in Congress. His very confusing, disgruntled campaign. Let's give him a lawsuit to do. Let's do it.
I mean, he did the last lawsuit against a petition to change the city charter.
I get your reference,
Josh. So why not another one? Yeah.
Wedge Live listeners definitely get your references, Josh. They think you're hilarious. They prefer you to me. They like your jokes more than mine. One of the things that's confused me over the many years, this petition drive has gone on for many years, and I think that's why the signatures are not matching. Like, people have moved.
Yes. And
they have been invalidated for that reason.
Yep.
But it's like, is this even legal? Like, one of the questions is what you are promising people with this petition even possible, because state law says the chief disciplines officers. Like, you can investigate, you can fact find, you can make recommendations, but it's the police chief is the one who decides. And so I thought this petition had just kind of like petered out and was never going anywhere. And it looks like that's what's happening in a more public way now. But that's always been confusing to me over the many years of this petition drive. It doesn't sound like this is something that is even possible.
At least under existing state law. There may well be merits in something like this, but that would be something that you would need to change at the state legislature first in order to enable the creation of something like this. Now, I'm sure the group disagrees with me, and they have their arguments for why the Charter Amendment would be compliant with state law. But that's my layperson read of what's going on here.
So I have my problems with the city clerk. One thing I don't question is that they did everything by the book when it comes to validating the signatures. And I read the press release from the CPAC organizers accusing the city clerk's office of impropriety. Am I characterizing that accurately?
Yeah, there were a couple things going on in the press release. So for one thing, there were some parts of it where they seemed to take issue more with the state laws regarding signatures rather than the clerk's verification themselves. Like, I don't think they were just, for instance, the fact that people moved, right, and those signatures are no longer valid. I don't think they were disputing that the clerk accurately applied the law with regard to that, but they were, not happy about the fact that the law is the way it is, that it has to be the person's current address, and the fact that they moved can make the signature invalid. There were other aspects of it where they did seem to allege either some sort of impropriety or at least error on the part of the clerk. And that was specifically in regard to the signatures that were thrown out because supposedly, according to the clerk's office, they found several pages of the petition where the language describing the charter amendment was different than other pages of the petition. And so the pages that were different, they tossed out those signatures. So that I think is the part that they're disputing and seem that they might challenge. But I would point out that they're short by about 3,500 signatures. So, even if they were to fix that group of signatures, they would still be short by like 2,000 signatures. So they would need to fix quite a number of issues with the signatures that are found to be invalid, either through legal proceedings or through some other means, or they would need to collect additional signatures, which is also an option. And the window for this is very tight. It's only 10 days. So it seems like a very, very high hurdle for them to get the required number of signatures.
So it appears that the Police Accountability Commission is it's going to be a tough road. Probably not happening this year. But there's a third charter amendment proposal from I'm blanking on his name, Steve Brandt.
Yep.
Our BET president. Is he president now of the BET?
He is now, yes.
He is one of the two directly elected members of the little-known board, Minneapolis Board of Estimate and Taxation, which basically, all you need to know about that is they approve refinancing of the city's debt, stuff like that. Also, during budget time, they approve the maximum tax levy. So the mayor proposes something and they sign off on what they think the maximum levy should be. It's usually, let's not get into that. Let's not get too deep into what the BET does, but that's the gist. They don't do much.
Well, they do bonding requests and things too, but yeah.
An example of what they do is the city was going to refinance Target Center debt a handful of years ago, and Carol Becker went on the TV news to brag about how she was voting against that. She is smart enough, she must be smart enough to know that refinancing debt is not about taking on new debt. It's about getting a better rate on the debt you already have. It is a money-saving measure. She went on television And I don't know how Tom Lydon let her get away with this, to act like this was a giveaway to sports team owning billionaires to refinance the city's existing debt on Target Center. It's not what it was. It's like, that was very frustrating. So things like that, things that have an impact on the city's bottom line. We're finally getting to what the proposal is after explaining what the BET is. Steve Brandt wants to add a third directly elected member. And I guess we should explain the members are one commissioner who is elected to the park board, gets assigned to the BET.
Yep.
Got the council vice president, council president, who are elected in their own right.
I would say technically it's not necessarily the council vice president. It's the council member who chairs the committee with jurisdiction over the budget, which currently happens to be the council vice president.
You're correct, Josh, once again. And have I mentioned all the people who are on it? You got the mayor. I forgot the mayor. Mayor, yes. 2 council members, 1 park commissioner, 2 directly elected from the public who are on your ballot as I'm running for BET. That's 6 people. Steve Brandt is saying we can't have an even number of people on this board. It's creating situations where important issues are held up by tie votes, and we can't decide up or down one way or the other. I mean, a tie vote fails. That's essentially voting it down, a tie vote. So it's not like it's in limbo. It fails. And so was there another aspect to Steve Brandt's BET proposal aside from adding a third member? He wanted to change the name, right?
Yes. So he wanted to change the name because he felt, I think correctly, that Board of Estimate and Taxation means nothing to anyone and doesn't explain really what the board does. I think he suggested the Board of Debt and Taxes, but I'm not sure he was 100% firm on that. He just wants the name to be something different than it is now, so it more clearly communicates to voters what it does.
There's zero people who will know what the BET does if you change it to Board of Debt and Taxes. 0 additional people will be like, oh, now I get it. I don't think that.
I'm inclined to think regardless of what you call the BET, no one will know what it does.
No one will know. No one will investigate further to figure it out. It's one of the things, if you are at a party and you start talking about what the BET is, you could go on about it as Josh will, for dozens of minutes, and no one will go home and Google it to figure out what the hell Josh was talking about.
I don't know. That might be you about the BET. The Charter Commission is more my thing.
It's true. I don't even watch BET meetings. I did once run a write-in campaign for BET.
Did, yeah.
And I believe my name was written in over 2,000 times in my campaign for Board of Estimate and Taxation. So I'm in the BET campaign Hall of Fame probably here in Minneapolis if there was one. So very historic moment. So I think to tie the CPAC proposal and this BET adding a third directly elected member to the BET thing, the way they are connected for me is that I hate all the additional little boards and commissions that that we have or that people want to create, so we can delegate this little patch of authority to this group and this patch of authority to another group. And no one who doesn't spend their entire lives, like you and I, trying to understand what's happening, knows who they are, what they do, how they're doing their job. Are they good or bad? No regular person has time for that. Let's not create more members of the BET. Let's not even have a BET. Let's not have a CPAC. If you want the city council to have authority over the police, I am all for it. As was attempted in 2021 with that charter amendment, but not a fan of the park board. Clearly we elect some substandard people to our park board. Long history of that. No shortage of Wedge Live podcast episodes expressing disappointment in the Minneapolis Park Board. Does everyone remember Carol Becker? We elect crackpots, full-blown crackpots to our BET. No offense to the current members. Steve Brandt, I said some things about you during the last election, but you're fine. I like you, and this proposal is well-meaning. but very risky to like parcel out, delegate responsibility to these very low profile, low pay, low visibility boards and commissions with their little patches of authority, I think. I'm not a fan of this style of government.
Yeah, I agree completely. You know, there was at some point some people who talked about strong mayor, strong council. I think it undermines a strong legislative body to parcel out chunks of their authority to these other boards that get less attention, and that people aren't going to pay as much attention to. We should have one legislative body for the city, which is the city council, and then they can appoint these other boards to the extent that there's a need for them. So my preference would be don't add another member to the BET, abolish the BET, and abolish the park board. Unfortunately, we've tried that before, and the park board has been pretty successful in resisting that. Now, I think Steve Brandt's point, which is somewhat reasonable, is if we are stuck with the BET, which we might be, then maybe it does make sense to add a seventh member, and if we're gonna, so that we can break ties, and if we're gonna do that, probably makes sense to have it be an elected member.
I don't know that it makes sense to have it be an elected member. I mean, I think in terms of the power dynamics between the park, like the park board is going to be like, no, definitely don't add a council member to this, and the city council will be like, no, definitely don't add a park board member to this.
Well, you're quickly running out of options other than add an elected member.
I don't know. Adding another directly elected member, like I said, it's going to be a crackpot. Chances are high it would be a crackpot. I would take my least favorite council member on the BET than taking my chances on some random person, because it is not inconceivable that you have 3 seats for BET. You will only have 3 people who bother filing a campaign. That is not out of the realm of possibility. And do you just want whoever had the money for the filing fee to be the person who gets it? Recipe for a crackpot. I don't care how many tie votes you have on important issues. That person is not the one I want making that decision.
So so you would propose, to the extent we can't just abolish the BET and we need a 7th member, you would suggest adding a 3rd council member.
I have no problem with that. I also don't know why, we don't have 4 adults on the BET to make good decisions about refinancing our debt. Who are the 2 people, or who's the 3rd person who's no, we shouldn't refinance for a lower interest rate? Is it the part, one of the things missing from Brandt's argument was who are the people causing these tie votes on common sense things? Who are they? Call them out. Let's unelect them from whatever job they have now. Are they on the park board? Are they on the city council? Is it the mayor? Which are the members who are leading us astray here?
Yeah, the refinancing one was weird. The other one was disagreement over whether the BET gets its own staff, and that makes sense to me. That's power struggles,
right?
But I don't understand why they couldn't get, or I guess he said it never came to a vote, but why they couldn't potentially get 4 votes for refinancing.
Yeah, we might as well tell a long story about this. He was saying a thing that never came up for a vote, but that would have ended in a tie vote. He wanted to front load some city debt in 2022, I think, ahead of a Federal Reserve interest rate hike. You've probably heard of mortgage interest rates through the roof, making it hard to get affordable home ownership. Well, the city has debt that is affected by federal interest rates, and front loading some of that debt means the city is borrowing at a lower rate. We owe less money when we pay it back, and so sounds good to me. It's who were the 3 members who were not convinced by that, and why? It was never explained. But he also said it never came up for a vote. So I'm wondering if it's an overblown argument.
Well, or it never came up for a vote because they knew it would have been a tie, and they didn't want to have that happen.
Maybe we should have Steve Brandt on to talk about it. Is there anything else that we have not talked about here today, Josh? We're over an hour.
So those are the three charter proposals for the Charter Commission at this time. I would note with the BET thing, I don't think that's going to be on the ballot this year. I don't think Steve was proposing to put it on the ballot this year. I think he mentioned it being on the ballot in 2025. Okay. There's other charter amendments floating around, but they've basically been put on the back burner for now.
Is that related to the city council, like who the city council is allowed to approve among the mayor's appointments
Correct.
to run executive branch departments?
Correct. The mayor and council requested of the Charter Commission that they put that on the back burner, essentially, and the commission somewhat reluctantly agreed to that.
And Josh and I talked about that at the beginning of the year or the end of last year, I think, with an episode titled with a very clickbaity headline like the mayoral power grab is back for 2025. Turns out it's not back for, or 2024. Turns out it's not back for 24. It may be back for
maybe
2025. So, Josh, you will be monitoring all of this for us.
Absolutely.
At the Charter Commission, as always. And thank you for all that you do, Josh. And thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you.
It's been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.